Welcome to the October meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission. A few short items on our agenda before we start the main item. First of all, the village released the request for qualifications for the Southampton Hospital Adaptive Reuse Comprehensive Plan. Those are due back on November 1st. If anyone knows firms that are interested in submitting, you should certainly encourage them to do so. After we get proposals back, we will schedule some public meetings to review those. And we're setting up a committee that, as I think everyone in the commission knows, will include representatives of Southampton Hospital, because we really want to do this cooperatively with them. I think we're also going to invite the elected officials to participate either on an ex officio basis or have their staff members participate. So we get as broad a group involved as possible. Secondly, there is a public meeting on October 15th, Monday, October 15th at 7 p.m. at King's Chapel in Hillcrest to review the study that was done by Studio AB of the build conditions in Hillcrest that we discussed at our September meeting. And we're going to post, hopefully on Monday, the draft report from Studio AB, so everyone in the public can see it. There's also a survey that they've done a draft of that I think needs a little more work, but hopefully we can get out by the end of next week so that if there are people in the community who can't respond personally to who can't attend the meeting, they can fill out the survey and we can get as broad a representation of that community as possible. At our November meeting, which will be 2 weeks after that public meeting, I think we will talk again about the alternatives that Studio AB talked about and see if we can forward one to the trustees for their review. And that will be the finish of our zoning study. Unless there's anything else, I think our main topic for tonight is to really, I think, hopefully kick off again the study of the drainage and sewage issues that exist within the village center. And also impacting very specifically on Lake Agawam. This is an issue that's been a concern in the village for a long time. Despite some fairly significant efforts on the village's part to address some of the drainage issues, the lake has continued to deteriorate. In the last few weeks, there was the worst algae on record in the lake. The lake is now the most polluted water body in New York State, which I guess is of some note, but not note that this village needs. And so it's an issue that we've been aware of for a long time. The commission has been dealing one way or another with this issue for many years. The Village Center Master Plan, which was done, I guess, about 5 years ago now, really the core of it, was done on the idea of creating a zoning for the Village Center so that if the sewage and drainage issues were addressed, that any growth in the village would be under control. About 2 years ago, we undertook at the trustees' direction a study of a potential sewer district for the village center. There was a decision made, I think, by everyone, including this group, not to proceed on that. There were a number of issues that I think led to that. One was the capital cost of that type of plant. Secondly, there was, I think, a good deal of concern about the extent to which, while the sewer plant would, and the sewer district would assist in addressing the problems of Lake Agawam, in and of itself, it was not going to comprehensively address the issues in Lake Agawam. So some of the things we heard were, this is great, but we're going to spend an enormous amount of money and have this very disruptive project, and at the end, we're affecting maybe a third of the pollutants in the lake, so we still won't have a clean lake. And I would say finally, while the sewer district was really posited on the idea that the property owners in the village center would bear the majority of the cost, there was not a good deal of support among the owners to undertake that obligation. So decision made on everyone's part to put that on pause. A number of things that happened since then, two I would talk about in particular. One is the county has finally, and Mr. Schiffer has certainly been bringing that to the Commission's attention, the county has finally begun to allow some of the alternative systems to be used in the county, which have the potential of significantly changing the capital cost. And then secondly, and more recently, some of the property owners along the lake, or around the lake, understanding that I think some of the easy answers that they hoped would address the issues have not worked and probably will not work, I think are now much more interested in getting involved in trying to find a comprehensive approach. So with that backdrop and with the mayor and trustees having asked us to look at this issue again, I think we want to come with a fresh look and a fresh approach and see if we can address this. This is not something we're going to be able to address in a month. I think it's going to take some time. It's fairly complicated. We're very fortunate that Nick Palumbo, who's a resident of the village, has agreed to help us. And Nick was at this meeting, I guess, a few months ago, and has been on the sustainability committee for the town. Is a professor at Suffolk County Community College. Has a good deal of experience that I think will be very relevant for us. And we've asked Jesse Warren, who's the newest member of the commission, to get involved. And one of the things I think Jesse can help us with, which we did not do a great job of last time, I can vouch and take maybe some responsibility for, is do much better outreach early on to make sure that we get people to buy in before we get to the point of doing reports and plans and everything else. So that this is something that really, use a bad word in this context, or organically comes out of the village community rather than being something we try to impose. So with that, I know, Mark, you wanted to say a few things, and then Bill Shaloff, who's here with Nick, has a presentation we'd like to hear, but Mark, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we got there or wait until after Bill.
Well, I think that the study that was done by CDM Smith was a comprehensive study. I think that it was a good solution. It was a traditional solution with a centralized sewage treatment facility. We had found a location by the police station, which we thought was the least disruptive to the community. The solutions that was proposed was to create mini substations in the parking areas where already we have all those septic systems that we collect in this area. I mean, unfortunately, because of the fact that it has to be done, preventing wages and in a certain way, according to a lot of the state regulations, the capital cost became very, very high. And I think that one of the, now we can look at other methods. One of the advantages of going with a sewage treatment plant is that at that point you have no more the restriction in terms of the use and the gallonage per day. There's no more that restriction that you have under the code with this health department.
Right.
That going with a centralized plant where controls is the capacity of the plant, it's no longer the area of each lot. So I think that now that we should definitely look at other possibilities, not only in terms of technology and methodology, but also maybe look into maybe do a public-private partnership or try to find out other ways to structure the development of the sewage treatment or the wastewater in a way that it doesn't just fall on the commercial area or and I think it can be a win-win situation for everybody. So definitely, I'm very interested. We appreciate your involvement. And
I just want to mention, we had an engineer come before our board, and he mentioned there's 4 things causing it. The sewage is 20%, road runoff, the people around the lake, and the geese. He says, if you clear up those 3, you have a large quantity of geese going to that lake. They can definitely shock that lake into the condition it's in now. So that was the problem. He couldn't come up with any solutions. What he mentioned is different ways we could do, as far as the road runoff, the sewage, and the people around the lake will have to cooperate of not using phosphates or nitrogen around the lakes. They'll have to put a barrier there. But then what do you do with the large quantity of geese? That could be a problem. Now, there's one other problem, is the village does not have jurisdiction over that lake. The town trustees are the ones that own that lake.
Right, but the village has jurisdiction about everything that goes into the lake.
Yes.
And I don't think the issue, honestly, has been the trustees have tried to be helpful, but they can't solve the problem.
Part of the problem is, I can remember as a child, before they put in some of this drainage, we would get water going across County Road 39 that was dark brown coming off potato fields.
Right.
And where was it all going? Into Lake Agawam. There's probably enough topsoil at the bottom of Lake Agawam, DDT, and you name it, that the farmers put down is probably in Lake Agawam.
Right.
And one of the old timers suggested to me that they ought to dredge the bottom of the lake, put a coffer dam at the end, but then you have to get permission for it's an involved thing, but it's basically clean all that sediment out of the place. Now, somebody also mentioned that there was another way of possibly cleaning it up. Now, I think the town trustees tried that in Watermill, using some type of chemicals. I remember reading it in the paper. They were trying to get rid of some of the nitrogen and phosphates, but I don't think it worked.
So, okay. So, Nick, do you want to introduce Bill, or?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you mind? Thank you.
So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to participate. I think this effort is somewhat overdue, and excited to see that it's being jump-started here. So, as you mentioned, I'm a member of the Town Sustainability Committee. A lot of discussion, obviously, at the town level related to water quality. And I think one development that you didn't mention, which is significant here, is that since the last proposal related to the sewage system here, there's been a change in the legislation related to community preservation funds. Right. And 20% of the annual revenue from that fund can now be utilized to address water quality issues. And the town has developed a process to access those funds and to distribute those funds. In fact, I believe the phase 1 funding round is already come together. So the village is a little late to that, but in the future, there's potential for significant funding source to come out of that to address this issue. And so, as you mentioned, I invited my friend, Bill Chelliff, who's also a member of the Town Sustainability Committee, who's done a lot of research on waste collection systems, and I think has a really interesting proposal that I wanted to share with the committee as maybe a beginning to the discussion. So, Bill.
Thank you, Nick. I'm Bill. Hi, Bob. Good to see you after so long.
Yes. Good to see a familiar face.
I don't know if it looks the same anymore, but I'm Bill Chayla from Rogers Architects. My partner was a founding member of the Sustainability Committee in the town, and I've succeeded him and been working on these issues of benign development and construction in this area for 46 years. My professional qualifications are only that of a registered architect, but I've been involved with these since Studio AB, was working with the county, and I guess it's 10 or 12 years now that this has been going on. And I spoke with the previous administration, too, about the H2M plan. And Mark, you mentioned a plan by Smith?
CDM Smith and H2M.
I see. Oh, I see. Okay. I just want to be sure I didn't miss. I was talking about the same plan. So I apologize if any of this is that you're more than familiar with it, and then just kick me in the pants and we'll roll right along. But I think it's important to be sure of the scale of the problem in its larger aspects, and so we'll spend just a couple of slides on that. And I think this first slide is a quote from Steve Ballone, and yes, it's a big problem for us. And as you say, Lake Agawam now has a distinction of being probably the worst body of water in the state, which is a distinction you don't want. But you're not alone. It's true of pretty much all the ponds and all the other bodies of water that are lakes, and also we have troubles, of course, with the Peconic estuary system. This is because we have over 360,000 private septic systems in the county, which is more than the entire state of New Jersey. And half of these were installed before 1972, which means that their effectiveness is horrendous. They are very good at one thing, which is pumping nitrogen directly down into the water table and waste down into the water table, because again, they don't have septic tanks. So the amount of nitrogen can be easily more than 20 times the safe limit for drinking water, or which is 400 times more the safe level for a healthy estuary system. We do know from the work by Chris Gobler of Stony Brook, who's been working on this issue for, I guess, the better part of 20 years now, is that 80% of the nitrogen flooding our estuary system does come from deficient septic waste disposal systems. It may be true in Agawam that there are other contributors or other factors skew the result for that particular body of water, but Lake Agawam is not the only issue for the village. And this is the county map, and it shows, when we have groundwater and surface waters, we're so close to the water table, and we're so close to the estuary system that, for all practical purposes, there's no place that's less than 20 years away from whatever you put down on the ground. That finds its way into either surface waters or groundwaters, even if you're on the moraine. And this is the map showing the borders of the village in magenta. And in the middle, that little amoeba blob is the shape of the proposed district. This is taken exactly from the H2M proposal. Right in the center, and just an eyeball guess is that that's about 1/50th of the area of the village. So that system, as expensive as it was, fails to do two things. It fails to address the issues of Lake Agawam, because it doesn't deal with any catchment, doesn't interrupt any of the flow, the surface flows into the lake, except at the extreme northern point, and nor does it deal with any of the issues from the other bodies of water, or really any of the septic systems from all the residences in the rest of the village. It seems to me that that is something that has to be addressed. If we continue to allow these private septic systems to work as they have been, or even if we mandate changes to some of these new alternate systems, I think that that's a far more expensive way to go, and also the concept of individual systems raises the questions of maintenance and assurances that these systems continue to work. And more importantly, these proposed new wave of approved systems that the county has monitored and has now told us we should be installing barely comes down to the level of 5 milligrams of nitrogen per liter, which is below the level of safe drinking water, but it is not anywhere near approaching the level of purity that we need for a proper estuary, healthy estuary system. So these are maps from the county that you know where we are, and this is the area that we're talking about. This is the federal standard of the maximum amount of milligrams per liter for drinking water, and that is 10. And the most interesting part that I was learning when I first got involved with this is that that standard for, again, a healthy estuary system is 0.5 milligrams per liter, or 20 times more pure than our drinking water standard. And this is where these things fall apart. If we have these new innovative alternate systems, as they're called, that the county has approved, 10 or 12 of them at this point, and they're running at about 5 milligrams, that's twice as good as we need for healthy drinking water, but it is 10 times worse than we need for a proper working estuary system. The estuary system, as you know, it's the backbone of the original economy of this region, which is finfish and shellfish. And it's also, of course, the backbone now of our resort economy. And we don't want to play around with that. It's my opinion. So we have to meet these standards. I think any system that we should be looking at would at least approach this and acknowledge this. If we, again, go with this individual approach of, I don't know how many thousand septic systems you have right here in the village, but I know that for the township of Southampton, it's somewhere around 75,000. At some point, the industry will be raising the bar and will be putting out systems that work much better. So if we install X number of thousand systems in the collective area of the village that handles not only the issues of Agawam, but again, the issues of the septic flow for all the residences and businesses, when those come to market, do we take out all these X thousand systems and change them over again? Do we constantly have to do that and spend all the money? And I know that there are places on the East End with the East Hampton and Southampton townships, again, where there are grants and monies available from CPF funds and other sources, the state, that help people to offset the cost of these systems, and they're looking, of course, and hitting the systems that are first closest to surface waters, that are very close proximity to surface waters. But again, this problem is pervasive through really our entire region. And again, I think the individual solution is looking the wrong way. It's a collective problem. I think we need a collective solution. We have a collective solution for our drinking water. We've gone away from individual wells. I think we also should look at handling our waste collectively as well. So these are some choices, of course. Do nothing. In some cases, that sometimes is a smart thing to do. I don't think that's the case here at all, but we just have to note that it is an option. And number two, I we're talking about, bring each residence into conformance individually. And then the third option is install community collection systems with a community waste treatment system. So far, I'm not saying anything new to you, gentlemen, but I think it's, again, too important to look at this entire picture. Now, the H2M study looked at various systems. To my knowledge, there are no new ones. We're talking about collection systems now, we're not talking about treatment. There's the vacuum system, AirVac being probably one of the most prominent ones up and down the East Coast. There are low-pressure systems. There are several of these that use small diameter pipes and pumps, and they literally masticate and take the waste stream and push it in these pipes, and it follows the contours of the grade. And under a positive pressure, the vacuum systems work under negative pressure. And then there are the old-fashioned traditional systems that we inherited from the Romans, which are the gravity systems. And the system that H2M proposed was a combination, a hybrid system of low pressure and gravity. I read this several times, and I don't think that there was a fair assessment of the benefits of the vacuum system. And there were no sources cited and no research. It was not a very extensive accounting for why they fall down in this direction here. But nonetheless, the real shortfall of the system, again, is this one right here, number 2. It has 44 pumping stations, most of them with electric backup power, because if the power goes down, and we know it does out here, we can't have the septic system, collection system not working. So that's a big issue, and that's really what the cost, when we look at the cost, it was at that time about $35 million, if I'm not saying numbers that you don't know about, right? And that was, it's now almost 9 years ago that report was issued. I wouldn't, no, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
3, there's a date of 2009
There was
on the report. It's right on your
There's a few
website.
different reports, but the final capital budget was probably about two years old.
I see, all right, but I don't know if any adjustments were made in the estimated cost of the system between the initial
There were, I think
assessments.
that number assumed a 2020 start. Either 2020 or 2021 was the start date. That was
I see.
assumed. They estimated the cost to assume that start.
I see. So it's somewhere in that range, which is, it's still, right, an awful lot of money.
Right.
And lacking a fine breakdown of what we have, to me, it looks like that's where the money is. It's in all those pumping stations, which are mandated by the fact that you're using essentially a gravity system for the trunk lines, and you're using the low pressure system for the feeder lines. That's how it's made up to be. And in just the area of the village, again, we see it here, just in that little amoeba in the center there, which is, I think, less than a square mile, to have 44 stations to deal with the issue that the grade is relatively flat everywhere is just amazing to me that they had to use that number of stations, and again, back them up with tremendous number of standby power. And they suggested a standby power unit for each individual pumping station if it was handling a one tenant's worth of flow. But if they handle collective flows from various parcels, then one standby power station could be used for a couple of different pumping stations. But nonetheless, it's a tremendous amount of work. The pumping stations are very expensive, and the standby power diesel generators are also very expensive. And they all have to be tested, they all have to be maintained. And again, when you do all of that, as you mentioned in your introductory remarks, they don't go anywhere near to solving the catching and intercepting the flow that's hitting Lake Agawam specifically, and also they don't handle anything else in the village. It's just the downtown, right?
Right, what they do is significantly reduce, if not very significantly reduce the nitrogen load into the lake. That's really what it was doing.
Well, not so much. Again, if we look at this map,
Right.
you know, the solution, the sewer district just touches the northern tip of Lake Agawam.
Right.
And it doesn't do anything about, you know, all the large surface
Correct.
areas
Correct.
contributing from east and west.
Right, it doesn't
So-
deal with the houses around the lake, but it did deal with
Yeah.
the nitrogen that was coming from.
Coming from the catchment area
Yeah,
from the
there was a
north.
study by Chris, who you mentioned,
Gobler.
Chris Gobler.
I
Yeah.
don't
Did a
remember the
pretty
engineer's name, but he
comprehensive-
said by putting this, it's going to take care of about 20% of the problem.
30%, but the same issue. It's a piece of the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Correct. And again,
And very expensive.
right, and very expensive, right.
Right.
So I think even though these can be seen as independent issues, and I think it's to an advantage to look at them more as independent than as fully integrated, because of what I mentioned before, that as the technology improves, if we have fewer treatment plants, and I'm looking at the septic load for the entire village, I'm not looking at it just for that downtown area, I think that you can afford to update the technology because you might only have 2 or 3 plants to handle the whole village. And that would take the place of the X number of thousand. Again, I don't know the number of parcels in the village, but certainly it's in the thousands. All those individual systems, having to update them every 5 or 10 years till we finally get systems that are performing at the required level of 0.5 milligrams per liter to ensure that we have our safe and healthy estuary system, because it's not just the lake, we're bounded on all sides by the waters that define who we are and what we are culturally and economically, socially. So these vacuum systems have tremendous advantages as best as I understand them. They were invented during World War II as systems for collection and handling waste on the large naval ships, the battleships and the aircraft carriers and the large destroyers and so forth. So if you can imagine, a gravity system is not going to work in a ship that's constantly doing this, right? So they had to come up with some system, and they used these vacuum systems, and they still use them to this day on all these naval ships, and they work very, very well. And they have no power at the collection point. They have these hydraulic rams, and the manufacturer in this case for the air-vac system recommends 1 for every 2 households, so we don't have to, that halves the number of these things. So there's not an issue of power going down. The only power is at the central, I'll go back here, that building on the right, which is about the size of a garage, that provides the vacuum for this whole system, which is a big tree, you know, a distribution tree or a collection tree. And that one vacuum pump serves to handle that collection system, which has a range of 2.5 miles, a reach. So a collection diameter of 5 miles. So you'd need very few of these systems. And then from this point, you could use a low pressure system or a vacuum system and run to a treatment plant, wherever that might be. So you have a lot of freedom. Once you get off the gravity hook, you have a lot of freedom about where you can place the treatment systems, and that still service the whole region of the village. So these things, again, they have not bound by gravity. They're 4 or 6-inch. The largest pipe is 6-inch. There was an 8-inch large pipe for the gravity trunk system for the H2M scheme. There's no power at the collection point, so there's very minimal site disturbance. To put this in is not invasive at all. It's more analogous to how the water lines go in, which we know are not very invasive. and you don't need any monitoring at each collection point, as opposed to putting in these individual systems, one for each building, which some of them are very complex. Some of the, like the chromoglass units, have a whole series of different pumps and filters and valves and so forth, a lot of moving parts. And the homeowner is inclined to investigate the workings of that as he is to open the hood of his car and make sure that the car is working all right. And yet that's going to be the homeowner's responsibility. And I think that that doesn't make any sense no matter how I look at it, even if I stand on my head. So I think that these systems would really do a great job, and they also are necessary if we follow the new master plan, which I think is absolutely brilliant and a wonderful plan. I was watching EEK as they move through the whole process of developing this plan. I think it's outstanding and will inject a tremendous amount of the kind of quality of life features that you're looking for, in that it's essentially pedestrian-based, and yet it handles parking, it handles housing, it responds to all the programmatic issues that face the village. And in order to achieve the density and just handle the septic load, which was not really addressed in the EEK plan, they addressed ground drainage, they didn't address septic drainage, septic waste. I think, again, the central vacuum collection system would be the right way to go. So in that one way, these things are bound together, that this would help the village in that way. So that implementing the new downtown and the arts center and the housing, I think, is really dependent on the proper working of a community-scale waste collection system. And these are some contacts and resources that I've used, and I checked them just today to be sure they're all current. These are some engineering firms and also manufacturers of the collection systems. I did not focus, again, on the treatment plants because, again, I'm not concerned. If there are only 2 or 3 that can service the whole village, then we can shop around, and they will be changing over time as the technology approaches what we need, of a goal of 0.5 milliliters per liter of nitrogen maximum. So there it is.
Bill, I have a question. What's the vacuum? What's is it? Is it a 10-inch vacuum or a 15-inch, 20-inch vacuum?
I don't know.
And you don't know what the piping they have?
They just use ordinary PVC Schedule 80.
Okay.
Yeah, for
Because
that.
that's very, very critical when you bury stuff in the ground that
Right.
the ground moves. You want to make sure that you have something that will flux with the ground. Because
Yes.
if you have a leak in that, you lose your vacuum.
Correct, but we don't pollute. That's a terrific advantage, again, of the vacuum system, is that the moment there's a rupture in the system, you'll read the pressure drop at the main collection point. You'll know right away that there's a vacuum and a break in the system, and yet you don't incur a leak anywhere, and the difficulty of finding it is not problematic.
So, but after you collected this stuff, I mean, there's another problem. What do you do with the water that's after it's purified? There's an article that was written, came out, Stony Brook University in 1960. The state of New York and Suffolk County did a research on groundwater. And one of the problems they said in this report was that our groundwater was not being recharged, the water was not being recharged back into the earth. It was being pumped out in the ocean. And the sewer treatment plants are one of the biggest problems.
Right.
Now, in Florida, I know they take this treated water and they use it on the golf courses. So they reuse the water again. But you can't use this water for drinking water.
That's correct. And that in the current system, and if we look globally, Bob, at what's happening, because we're not suffering alone, with this set of circumstances. This is an issue globally. There are, treatments that are so effective that they're actually creating potable water. And eventually this is what we'll have to do. But meanwhile, yes, we have to continue to recharge. And it really is a function of what system you elect for treatment and to what degree it's performing well, and then what you want to do with it. Irrigation And even irrigation on farmland is an acceptable use for all these systems that we're looking at today. But down the line, again, like what Mother Nature does, we close all the loops, we recycle everything.
There's a laundry in town that I was in. They have a high-pressure filtering system that they reuse their water. I think it goes to like 6,000 pounds. It shoves it through this. It costs them $250,000 to get this thing serviced. But when the water goes in gray, it actually comes out crystal clear at the other end.
Others on the commission?
Yeah, I just wondered, do you have any estimates on how much it would cost to, if you have an existing house and you have to repipe to get to the street versus the cost of putting in one of the newer systems?
Oh, well, there are two ways to do this. And again, this would be something for engineers, whether it's Cameron or someone else, to go over. And that is whether or not you just take the effluent right out of the septic system. There are places that have no septic tank. You'd have to install a septic tank. Or they also engineer this system, and it depends, again, what the treatment plant is, so that you hook up directly to the house. There is no septic tank, and you take the full septic load in this system and run it to the treatment plant. So there are two different ways to do
So the cost to the homeowner was basically
It could be
pipe,
not.
running that pipe to the street?
That's it, a 4-inch PVC pipe.
Okay. And then presumably these newer systems the county's talking about, or I don't know how much they cost. Mark, do you know how much they cost?
$1 million, we're talking.
No, just the ones that you can put in your home.
Was around
Those are 20,
25,000.
yeah, $25,000, right.
25,000, but they can treat
Yeah.
the water to
Right.
exceptional levels.
Yeah, you can treat them again. You can get 5 milligrams per liter performance out of those systems. But again, the reason for widening the scope of the problem, instead of just taking the downtown area, but looking at the whole, then now you can hook up, you can collect monies from everybody on the system.
Right, but the issue when we designed that system, and when I was working with both the Department of Public Works and the CDM and H2M, one of the issues was to try to have a sewage treatment plant that had a size that was manageable. And
Yes.
that's why, we tried to minimize I don't remember exactly how many gallons per day we came up with, but that was a size that was manageable that we could still put within the village. Otherwise, those plants are a real nuisance.
Yeah, but they don't have to be, again, if we have this kind of layout, we're flexible to have this layout, you can locate them not in the village. You can locate them, let's say where the hospital is, where the college, is, or the other places, you can put them remote, because you'll have a direct, quote, an express line from the collection point to the treatment center. And again, you won't have so many of them. The fewer you have, the larger they are, the more economical they will be. But there is the environmental impact of this big, quote, industrial. But some of these don't look that way at all. I got involved first with a system of treatment known as the living machine. And the living machine is essentially constructed wetlands. It uses tanks within a greenhouse. There is no aroma. I've been to several of these places. I've been to one in upstate New York. I've been to one in Canada. I've been to one in Florida. And they work really, really well. And they just recycle the water. And these are out there on the cutting edge in the more organic direction. And the other direction would be something like Chromalox, where you have, a tremendous number of pumps and maybe these high-pressure filters and so forth. So, again, we need to take it the next step, but I think that conceptually, this step is one to consider. It's different enough from what we saw where I think the economics can work for the village, and not only economics, but the result, the environmental benefit is you'd be servicing the entire village, and I think it's really the way to go.
Other comments?
What other communities are using this exact system?
Up and down the eastern seaboard, a lot of Maryland, and further down, all the way down to Florida, and some systems further north too, up Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. There are some of these vacuum systems that have been installed.
And then
They go back 15
You said New Jersey has a lot more coverage than certainly Suffolk, but what systems are they using there?
I don't know what they're doing in New Jersey.
See, one of our problems is we discussed the sewage treatment plant, you know, and I've worked in two of them here, one in the hospital and one at rehab. The Southampton Hospital is an old plant, let me tell you. It is definitely, and you go to rehab, it's like night and day. The technology is just light years ahead.
Right.
And that's still an older plant.
Right.
But I can see the difference. But the trouble is the stigma of it in the village. As soon as you mention where you're putting the plant, we had enough people come before the board, not in my backyard.
Oh, of course, right. Well, maybe I should have presented, and I think I have the materials here too. I could show you these greenhouse. The greenhouse would be your neighbor, and it's a great place for kids to come in, the school kids to come through. There are fish that are edible, that are a product of these systems, and mostly plant material. And they're closed systems. They don't. All these other systems that we're talking about that the county is looking at still creates effluent that goes out into the ground. They have, whether they're trenches or leaching pools, you know, there's a flow out, an outflow into the groundwater. And these again are closed.
Well, Riverhead's got an older type of system, because when I play golf up there, you go past that and you can definitely know you're near a sewage
You know where
treatment
you are. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
But I have maybe one question for Nick, since you're on the town sustainability committee. Does the town have any plans to treat the effluent that comes out of the town hall? Because that's a major, they have relatively close of the town hall.
Not that I'm aware of. I know there's a capital program underway right now for Town Hall, and I don't think that's an element of it.
Right.
I think they should
But obviously,
incorporate it.
Town Hall is part of the village, and so, it's the same challenge there.
Right, and they are
Something we
within the,
discussed when we were looking
Yeah.
at that plan, whether it should include town hall.
right, because they are within the tributary area of Agawam Lake, and the waste does flow into.
Yeah.
So, and they are, you have the school.
The schools, of
and-
course, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, again, they
and
could be
that-
assessed. They could be assessed for the payment, the installation and the maintenance costs of these things.
Bill, this treatment plant, could that handle a road runoff? Because that's another major problem.
No, you don't want. It is, but you don't want to commingle.
Okay.
And that's a huge problem that shows, with Sandy, and again, the gravity systems, when they got flooded, and we have to look at resilience here, and we know in flooding what's happening in this region. And what happens when you get flooding, even from a heavy rain, is that it backs up into the sewage, when they're commingled, and you get raw sewage. That's what's happened.
That's, honestly, with all due respect, I think the newer plants like Patchogue, that's not the case.
I agree, because they're not.
That was a problem with the older plants.
I agree.
They have backflow
I'm saying, right.
preventers and-
Those are open, right.
They're now built not to back up.
They're separate.
Right,
That rain drainage
Right.
is a totally separate
Right,
system
correct.
from here.
It's a-
And that's what I'm recommending you.
Yeah.
You don't
But
commingle.
that's part of the problem of Lake Agawam.
Yeah, but that we can do, that was addressed with the with the EEK plan for downtown by using swales and rain gardens. You can handle that load. You diffuse it instead of creating rivers of flow and put it into essentially gravel beds underground and directly recharge that way.
And
There's a book I read, this goes back to 1890, that the summer colony wanted to create Lake Agawam Park. And Agawam Park was a big swamp. And the doctor in town was in charge of the health department. And he told the summer colony that he knew no disease coming out of that swamp. And he said it was a filtering system for Lake Agawam.
Probably was.
And so in 1921, he was long gone dead, and they filtered it in.
So let me make a few comments. One is, first of all, thank you very much. It's very helpful. And I think just indicative of, I think I think maybe one way to approach this now is to be much more open, that there may be various answers rather than stick to one physical way to address the issue, whether it's sewer treatment plant or the alternative systems or a gravity system. I think one is to be much more open and really look at which is the best rather than start out and with an assumption that one is the way to go. And I think this is a very helpful information for that.
But I think also it's important to maybe start to engage and have a dialogue with the health department.
Right.
That to be able to, because within the confine of the existing regulation, it's very hard to work.
Right.
And maybe we should start a dialogue with them and review the problem with them and see whether, instead of having to create 5 districts, maybe we can create 1 district if we want to have.
I think the
multiple
vacuum
plans.
system's got a great deal of merit.
But so, Bill, you said something which I think was very helpful at the beginning, which is, and it's true for Lake Agawam, and it's ultimately true for the other water bodies in this village, which is there are multiple issues that need to be addressed. So, for example, in Lake Agawam, we know nitrogen for the village center is one issue. As you said, or someone that maybe you said, we also know that we have a similar problem from the houses around the lake, who definitely are a contributor to the problems we see. There are long-term issues, as someone mentioned, which is that there's been drainage into the lake for many, many, many decades, and so there's inherent problems there. So I think, and I think one thing we've heard very clearly, and your approach is really talking in that direction, is that for us to be able to do something and get a consensus in the village, we're going to have to be able to say that even though it may not happen in 1 year, that over time the water bodies really will be cleaned up. That something that says we're going to clean up 50% of the problem is not going to be something that wins public support. We are, in fact, which is always the sort of push-pull here, we're in fact a fairly wealthy village with tremendous bonding authority. So at one level, one would think that you could address the issue. Obviously, the problem on the other side is no one wants to pay. So you have that sort of push-pull. On the one hand, you do have the potential ability, but I think it's going to take a lot more public support and public education to get people to the point where they're willing to say, yeah, we should participate in this. Because the reaction last time was very clearly, this may be a very good idea, but no one wants to pay for it. So, and I don't think we did a good job of, in any way, building that coalition. So I think part of the point here is we want to start out by reaching out to all the constituencies to really engage them at the beginning of the process. And the homeowners are good examples. The homeowners clearly now have reached a point that they understand this is an emergency and something needs to happen. I think some of them hope there's some magic answer, like, I've heard several times now, let's just open up the cut to the ocean, and the thought that will solve the problem. That won't. But I think they're a good example. Health department's another example. There are obviously a lot of resources in the village. Both the merchants and the owners in the village center, getting them involved at the beginning rather than at the end, to see what they're, what they really want to happen.
If I could just have a final word about this.
Yeah.
I think that is the single most critical thing to do.
Right.
And, being an advocate of, again, green building, it's not about the various technologies. It's about the process.
Yeah.
And the process is open and transparent, involving all the stakeholders at the very beginning.
Right.
And it's totally different how the first system was presented as a fait accompli, and you're paying for it, and tough luck, and so forth. No. And that's why I didn't come.
Tough,
right.
But anyway.
But that's why I didn't come with,
Right.
full, firm
Right.
solutions. I'm just saying, again, there are other things to explore, but Mark is right, that we have to involve other engineering firms and look at other materials, but clearly have open forums that everybody can attend
Right.
and feel that they're participating and helping to find the solution. And then when the end comes, when you have to write issue the invoices, they'll be honored without
The other
difficulty.
important point here is to
Yeah.
frame this as a collective problem, which it
Right.
is. This is not just a problem of the business district.
Right,
It's a
correct.
problem of the village and
Right.
and the surrounding community.
Right,
And that
right,
we all need to be part of the solution.
right.
Let-
Yeah. So,
Could you come up there for a second?
thank you.
You're most welcome.
I mean, I've lived here my whole life. I've been on the water my whole life. This problem, I mean, Dune Road's been built up since I was a kid. The difference is now, what you just said, I don't believe, about cutting open Lake Agawam. You look at Mecox Bay, you can still get clams out of there, and that's because they opened the cut. Mother Nature has breaches on Dune Road for a reason, to suck the water out and to bring new water, and our estuaries are polluted now because we continually close up every time we have a breach on Dune Road. And I've watched this my whole life. Ever since we've stopped doing that, I take my boat and I see it. I see the water stagnant. I mean, I see algae growing. But Mecox Bay, which has more houses and more lawns up against it, does not have this problem because they cut it 2, 3, 4 times a year. And the only way you're going to fix Lake Agawam is to drain it every year. And that's the only way you're going to do it. And Mother Nature will take that water and will redo it, just like it does. That's why we have hurricanes. We have low pressure that sucks the water out of bays and sends it in the ocean and sends new water. And this is Mother Nature. You guys are trying to change it, and you're trying to stop the way our planet works and the way Mother Nature works. As far as the sewer system goes, I was all for it until I found out what the real reason was. It was to increase density. It had nothing to do with pollution because, like you said, there's not one single house that was going to be hooked up to it. So what were you doing with a sewage system? And, you know, the mayor, Epley at the time, finally said, well, you know, the restaurant business stinks because we can't hook up, we don't have wet uses, and that was the reason why they wanted the sewage treatment plant. And I can tell you from watching on public TV with the CPF, CPF has villages going up there every month now with capital projects, West Hampton, Sag Harbor. This village doesn't have any capital projects. They're free. They're giving money out right now, millions of dollars. And what are we doing? We got our hands in our pocket. And whoever they got, I asked the village trustees, I said, I'll volunteer, I'll go there, and I'll put together projects for this village. They said, no, we're going to have Kimberly do it. Well, there's no projects going on. There's nothing going on. And you guys, CPF will eventually run out of money someday, and you're going to have none of it because you don't have one single project before that board right now. And they're giving the money out very freely. They just gave West Hampton a whole Main Street drainage system. I saw it on TV on public access, and we're doing nothing. You know, and you guys have really good ideas, but you know, if you don't have the money to do them, what good are they? You know, and you're missing the boat right now.
I just want to tell you, there is a drainage system set up for Lake Agawam for draining it. They put this pipe in many years ago.
Right.
And I don't know how often they open it up or when they open it up, but
About once a year at least.
Once a year.
yeah, they do open it up.
They don't drain it. They don't. I mean, the cut over in Mecox is huge. It's 30 foot wide, and the water's running out for weeks.
Yeah, but I think
that little pipe is going
I
to do
think part of
nothing.
the problem, I think Lake Agawam is higher than the ocean. I think that's the problem, why you don't get the reverse.
But there should be some way to breach that because I see it over in Quogue and East Quogue where the breaches used to go by the.
Yeah, but that's
beach
much
bars.
lower area, that area. West Hampton Beach, they're always prone to flooding, and that area is a very lower area. Where if you look at our photography back here, as you further move back in this area, it goes up. And Lake Agawam happens to be higher than the ocean. If they can drain it out, but the ocean will not come back in unless you get a hurricane and you get a tidal surge.
Or they should pump it out or something because it's not going to go away. I mean,
I know they've tried aerating. You've seen them out there with the pumps and stuff, like trying to clear it up. But I remember as a child seeing all that topsoil, all the fertilizer they did, we used the DT coming down Windmill Lane. The storm drain sometimes couldn't handle all the water, and you couldn't drive across 39 because it's 4 foot or 5 foot of water inches of water coming across, and it was dark brown, and it all went straight into Lake Agawam.
Well, that's how Mill Pond is now with Deerfield Road. All the farm dirt runs right into the lake.
Yeah.
I mean, why don't they chlorinate it at this point? I mean, it couldn't hurt.
The only thing I know for sure is that I'm not a scientist, and so I can't address which is the right answer. My sense is the answers are fairly complicated here, and it's going to take a lot of different parts to address. And I think, just picking up maybe a little on what you said, I think it's just not accurate to say that the only reason for the sewer district was to create density in the village. Just not true. Just not true. Please let me finish.
And we addressed it now with the zoning.
It's not true, but I do understand very, very clearly that that became a common perception, and that shows
with the zoning.
right, and that really was a problem. But again, I think the ultimate problem, and one of the reasons that everyone pulled back, because it was a joint, the universal decision pulled back, was a feeling that an answer that just addressed a piece of the issue in the lake was not ultimately going to win support. That ultimately what the village needs to do is come up with a plan that really will say, and again, I don't think it's going to be overnight, but in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years, that lake really will be clean. And that's going to take many different things. Even as a non-science, as an amateur, I'm guessing from what I've read, that it's going to take more than one thing to do. And that's why we've asked some experts to get involved to help us ferret through all the different ideas and help us build a consensus in the village. Because again, I think one of the problems we have is to go to the CCPF and really be effective. We need to have some consensus in this village that yes, we all agree this is the right thing, and it's something that we have a universal approach.
But you know,
Have you looked at industrial revenue bonds as a way of financing the capital projects of the village? Because you'll eventually also have to put the electric lines underground.
Yeah, good
How about
point.
that?
As I said before, the village has enormous bonding authority at this point. And those bonds can be at very low interest, so that's a very efficient way of financing. But even at very low interest and a lot of authority, someone does have to pay them back at some point. And so the issue is really who pays them back, under what circumstances.
That's just how it's set up, but the point is it's a means of financing
absolutely
a capital
is.
project.
Absolutely
and we've got tons of money here, they'll invest. I offered Bill Hattrick that I would buy the first 20,000 if we did an industrial revenue bond for putting the electric lines underground.
but you have CPF money, so why aren't you
But
going?
both, you can use both.
I mean, right now, you should be getting drainage money. You know you need drainage money, and you have nothing in there. You have no plans, nothing.
So I have a question. If the last study that was done may not have been comprehensive, who could we turn to? It's, yes, we should start this as a public debate, but if there aren't more facts and information, it's hard for the public or myself to have an opinion. So, perhaps we need to look somewhere to someone who could look at the full range of issues, from, crazy expensive to do nothing, so that at least we could have some criteria to make a decision.
Right.
But one of the biggest factors when we did the last study was the size of the sewage treatment plant. And this is why we really tried to, in a sense, minimize the size of the area that was being serviced by the sewage treatment plant. But now I think that the way, maybe another solution is to decentralize and create maybe 5 mini sewage treatment
But
plants.
we need someone to help us
Right, at that point.
evaluate.
And I think that we should maybe go for an RFP to get consultants to come up maybe with a proposal to use decentralized
We have to make sure we don't
systems,
get a
smaller
consultant who
systems.
sells one system. We really need to
Right,
look
right.
very broadly
Yes.
at everything from swales to
Yeah, absolutely.
So Nick, do you have any comments about if how you would start here, or what you would look at first, or any thoughts about that?
No, I think some of what's being said now is pointed in the right direction, that it's a question of approach. And I think, the existing study is solid. I mean, I think there's some really good information there, but it's the first phase of, a larger study, which includes the larger village beyond the business district. And, and ultimately it may be a phased approach, but I think you're talking about having several smaller distributed systems makes more sense. But it's important to get the technology right.
Which is how they do it in Switzerland, or a lot of Europe, they do a lot of small, very small systems. But then you still have the person who's next to that sewage treatment.
You got to remember, it's three things you've got to tackle to clean the lake up. The sewer area, road runoff, and the people around the lake.
Maybe it'd be interesting to do a request for ideas as opposed to a request for
I think the
proposals.
road runoff and people around the lake is probably the first thing we can tackle quite successfully.
Yeah.
I mean, the road runoff is the swale for more swales.
You've got to contact them, convince them that beautifully green lawn they've got, you can't dump all those nitrogens
You
and
can use, organic type things, or other things.
Well,
Still nitrogen.
I think the point made here is valid, that we really need to get started, that there is funding available from CPF, and the village should be accessing that sooner rather than later. We know that, there are solutions at hand that we can access today, and we should be moving toward that.
Because, for example, all of the the Army bases all around the world, when they build the base, and they're like some of them are substantial, they actually treat their water to drinking to potable water standards. You go through membrane technology, it's actually potable water that comes out. So technology is there.
So what I wanted to add is there's a lot of good ideas here, and I don't want this commission or the public to get caught up over what we think is the solution or what may or may not, because the sewage system may be part of a solution, it may not be. So to me, there's not a big point debating about whether a sewage system is worthy or not, because we don't even know the answer to that. But what we do know needs to happen is we need to basically go out, we need to start pounding the pavement, we need to say, how are we going to raise money? So as you brought up, there's plenty of money out there. There's money through the CPF, there's money through the county, there's money through the state, and even more so in Southampton Village, there's money through the community, because I guarantee you that pretty much everybody that lives on the lake probably wants to get this cleaned up. So there's got to be, you brought up the idea of a public-private partnership. There's a recipe for that, and that seems to work. So in order to go and try to raise some of that money, what I think has to happen is we have to identify the causes, which we think we know, but we need to identify one at a time the solution for those causes. And then once we can find the solution for what's actually causing the pollution, then we could talk about actually cleaning up the lake. But there's no point talking about whether it's dredging or something else. We don't even know what's actually causing it or how to solve those. And so basically, and I don't know how to do this, but what would be great is to see some type of overview that can say, what are the causes, what are the solutions, how much is it going to cost us, what we need to do, and then we can actually take that, whether it's a document or a presentation, we could take it to the town, we could take it to the county or state and say, hey, this is how much money we need. And so that's what we need to do. And I'm happy to go, and maybe everyone in this commission could join, but I'm happy to go whatever that takes. But I think we need some type of overview that covers exactly what's the cause and then the solution. Forget about actually how to clean up the lake, because once we actually stop all the causes, then we could actually do it.
So as I said, there was a study that Chris Gobler did a few years ago, fairly comprehensive. I think it's a good start. I'm thinking maybe we pull together that and some other information. We've had some success recently, sort of Eldon's idea, doing workshop meetings where people can come in a less structured environment and we can have a dialogue. I think inviting some of the people who live on the lake, maybe even having it at one of their houses so that they really get involved in this.
And listen to the lake.
Right, but that would be really helpful, because there are things, as you say, there are things they could do. I think they're somewhat aware of it, that they can do, start to do that will begin to address some of the issues, but also, if this is going to be a public-private partnership, their getting involved, I think, is important. And so maybe that's something we could start with very quickly, because I think everyone understanding the sort of range of causes will be very helpful, because then it can help us think through, okay, so how do we answer this? Yeah.
I was just going to say, there is a charrette process.
Right,
Where
right,
you open up to the community, you hire a facilitator.
Right.
They run that, and it would be for a whole Saturday, in this
Right.
case, or something like that. You invite the whole town, you got
Right,
food, and
right.
it's a big party.
Right.
And you work at, it's part educational in the beginning. You're saying, what are the issues, what are the problems? And so
Right.
everybody gets versed in that,
Right.
and then you feel your way collectively to solutions.
I mean, the difference, I'm a big believer in that process. When you're doing just design, you can have, one architect professional, but here you seem, I don't understand. Every time I hear a presentation, and I've watched them on video, I hear a slightly different solution. So it's very hard for the public, and as I said, certainly for me sitting here listening, to know which of these options may or may not work and what the cost is. So maybe it's, as opposed to going right out for proposals, maybe you invite several of these professionals to a workshop and we listen to them.
There should be someone who leads.
yeah.
There
With
needs to
someone
be-
leading it.
there's somebody
I mean,
who
we
should
can,
lead it.
if we have, we could have a big
Yeah.
community meeting, but if we don't have facts, like how much is it per mile to run this pipe, for example?
Right, but I do think the first thing is to make sure everyone's aware of the cause. Because one thing that I found, certainly, again, as an amateur, sitting here through the hearings, I guess about 2 years ago, there was so much misinformation out there about what was going on. It was extraordinary. And so that makes it very difficult to create a consensus, because if people think that everyone has their theory of what the cause is or what's happening, but getting some consensus over at least the problem, I think, is going to be necessary to solve the solution. So, just as an example, if everyone thinks that the real reason we're doing this is some plot because I own restaurants or something, which I will vouch I don't, it's going to be very hard to make this work, right? And there was certainly a large part of the community who thought last time that was what it was about.
The mayor said.
I'm just telling you, so it was just, so we obviously, I think part of this is getting some consensus that everyone's agreeing on the causes,
Yes.
so that when we go out and find these answers, they're answers to the problems that we all agree we have.
As you said at the outset, though,
Right.
it very well may not be one cause.
Right,
It's not a
correct,
singular cause.
correct.
It's multiple causes, and there may
Right.
be multiple responses to those
Correct.
causes.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of what Chris, again, I'm not a scientist, but what Chris was saying is trying to find a single answer was not going to solve it. There are so many causes, and they've been going, and all the other thing is they've been going on for so long. This is not like a case where we're solving a 5-year problem, we're solving a problem,
It's all in the
50-year
ground, moving
problem.
through the ground, whatever we
Right.
put in right now anyway.
Right, right.
So it's all coming out.
Involve the Southampton Association to publicize it. The fact that we have a problem, they have a big stake in this.
Right, right. Yeah,
I just have 2 short comments. Number one, I think we should be honest that the sewer is also for the downtown, because it's going to become a ghost town if we don't get wet uses.
Right.
And Mark Epley was correct. And, and that's how it should be sold, that it's a combination. We're trying to preserve people living here too and make them live in. And also another one is, I have a house on Lee Avenue that we built. Now, right where it is, at the beginning of it, it floods. It's 4 foot every time it rains.
Right.
And guess where that water goes? It goes right into Hetty Creek. When it dries, it goes down. And, I'm in the construction business. We do drainage and everything. I'd be willing to volunteer with an engineer and find these spots, because this is something that's inexpensive, could be put together in 30 or 60 days, and you could get the money from the CPF, like Nick said. Let's pick off the easy stuff first. The stuff that we know. We know there's a 3 foot deep by 8 foot wide river of water going down Hill Street every time it rains. So let's do the stuff that's easy, that's free. And I think that's what you should suggest to the trustees. Let's start picking off the easy, low-hanging fruit while we're working on trying to fix the more complicated.
Let's start with the swales and collecting
Which
the
I think the
water
village's done a lot over the last
and
5 years.
getting rid of fertilizer around the,
Well, they diverted it to Lee
I
Avenue.
mean, one thing we have talked about, which I think would be very interesting for CPF for a lot of reasons, is addressing the main parking lot here, which is the biggest piece of land in the village. And as Bill had that drawing, that terrific drawing from EK, which pointed out you could do a tremendous amount of drainage control within that parking lot. And we have a parking lot that
Make it permeable.
is a
And
shame
the
of the
planning has
village
been
as
done
it
there, at
is.
least conceptually, right?
Right,
I mean,
correct. There is a,
detailed design.
there is a plan, yes.
And the plan has been approved by the
Correct,
trustees.
correct. So that may be a good example of a quick request to the CPF
Right.
to implement that plan, which would have all sorts of benefits beyond just drainage, obviously.
I've never seen them say no over there either, so it's not like you have to battle it out with them.
The no comes from the staff before the meeting. I think when you get to the meeting, it's pretty much set. It's the before that's the hard part. So,
When we did that study, the low-hanging fruit
Right.
was the plant next to the Southampton Hospital. And we thought it was perfect. And at that time, the Southampton Hospital was a private hospital, and now it has changed. It has now become part of a public entity. So maybe we could revive also
Right.
the possibility, because it is very well located. It is at a low point. It's extremely well located. It drains very. It was a perfect location, and it could be upgraded to whatever technology we
Yeah,
have.
but Mark, you remember the health department, we looked into it. The hospital's only using 1/3 of that plant.
Right, on top of
And
it.
the health department said if they ever change and go to a different facility, they'll need that whole plant, and you can't hook up to it.
I do know their plans at the college is to create a completely separate and new facility that would also, modernize what the school is doing there. So, okay, well, thank everyone for getting involved. I think this is going to be a major initiative for all of us that hopefully will lead to some success. Okay, so I want to close the October meeting of the Planning Commission.